Hello and welcome back to my channel. On this video, I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of August, and I got to just about 30 books over the course of this month. It was a wonderful reading month, so let's dive in and I'll share all about what I read. The first book that I finished was called What Have We Done by Alex Finlay. Now, I'm gonna say I don't remember much about this book. I feel like it is a typical thriller, and part of the reason I didn't remember much about this book is because I listened to it when I was walking around an airport for a trip I had to take for work. And my flight kept getting delayed, and I was like kind of stressed about that, and I was just kind of like having this book on in the background, and it was a great distraction for that, but not anything that was super memorable. So I don't want to knock it because I think it was more me than the book in terms of why I'm not remembering very much, but that was how I started out the month. Then I read a book called Mrs. Nash's Ashes by Sarah Adler. And this is a book that came on my radar because somebody mentioned it on Instagram and they said that they really loved it. And it's basically the story of a woman who is trying to kind of like fulfill the wish of a dear friend of hers who was elderly and who died, and she goes on this kind of road trip in order to do that and ends up being joined by a male companion, and they begin to have a relationship. And I love the road trip aspect of this. There were definitely some like really funny scenes in the book that I enjoyed, and also I loved hearing the backstory of her kind of elderly friend, and we get to learn a little bit more about her history as well, which I thought was really nice. Okay, then I picked up a book called Hello Stranger by Catherine Center. And this is the most recent book by Catherine Center. I've definitely talked about this author before on the channel. I really love her books, and I've tried to get through a bunch of her backlist in addition to the new stuff that's coming out. This is the book about a woman who is a portrait artist, and she has an accident and develops facial blindness because of like a brain surgery that she has to have. And I can imagine that some people are going to read through this book and see certain situations in the book that they're gonna just feel are like unbelievable. But I felt like the way that the book is represented is this woman just had brain surgery. And so all of the things that to me felt a little bit unbelievable, if she hadn't had brain surgery, okay, but she had brain surgery. And so it impacts kind of her perceptions of the world. And all that to say, I really liked this book. I loved how it came together and I loved how it ended. I'm still a total Catherine Center fan. Okay, then I read pretty much in succession the next three books in the Anne of Green Gables series. So the first one is Anne of the Island, and then there is Anne of Windy Poplars, and then a book called Anne's House of Dreams. These books are so charming, and I definitely got into some books that I had not read before. So I've read maybe the first few books in this series, but then I didn't continue on until kind of her adulthood and her marriage. And so some of these books were just great. All of the books were great. One of them in particular, and I believe it's Anne's House of Dreams, is she's living on this kind of like island, and there are all of these like local characters that she gets to meet and engage with as she's building her home. And there's kind of this like lore that comes in, you know, to the book as well, which I thought was really wonderful. I have 3 books left in this series, and I probably will binge them in the next month because I have just enjoyed this so much. Could definitely see doing a reread of some of these as well. Okay, then I picked up the second book in the Bellinger Sisters series, which is called Hookline Sinker by Tessa Bailey. This is a couple of books about 2 sisters who end up falling for men who live in this kind of like fishing village. And it is not where they are typically living, but they go to visit this town and then they end up kind of falling in love. And in this particular book, there's kind of this interesting twist in that the male character is kind of, he's kind of a serial dater. And what we kind of learn throughout the book is that he has like a real lack of confidence in terms of like being in a relationship. And so part of what's happening is that this woman who is falling for him is trying to build up his confidence of like that he's valuable, he can be valued in a relationship. And I just felt like it was kind of an interesting twist that we don't normally see in a romance novel. So I really enjoyed that one. Next, I picked up Forget Me Not by Julie Soto, and this is a book about a woman who's a wedding planner and a man who is a florist. And they had been in a relationship kind of several years back, and they get thrown back together because of this kind of like celebrity wedding that they're both working on. And we come to understand kind of why they broke up. There's kind of some flashbacks and flash forwards, or flash to presents, I should say. And it was really charming. I listened to this one on audio, and I feel like I got through it really fast, maybe in just a couple of listening sessions. Okay, then I picked up Pride and Premeditation. This is one of the books I had on my list that I was kind of interested in trying out. It is part of the Jane Austen murder mystery series by Tirza Price. This book was so great. I wasn't sure what to expect, but it is basically taking the kind of the themes of Pride and Prejudice and the character elements of different characters within the book and bringing them into this kind of like murder mystery setting. And it is definitely not like a direct match. Like some of the characters, things end up happening to them that do not happen, you know, obviously in Pride and Prejudice, but like the flavor, you know, kind of their character and of the themes of the book is there. I would definitely read more from this series. I have a couple of them actually out from the library and I'm hoping to get to them soon. Then I picked up one of my Alphabet Challenge books, which is called The Electricity of Every Living Thing by Catherine May. Now, I came to know Catherine May because of her book Wintering, which got like really passed around a lot in the pandemic because it was basically about her using the term wintering as kind of a season of her life where she was going through a form of depression and like trying to figure out how to deal with kind of some mental health issues that she was having. Catherine May is in, I think she's in Britain. She's a faculty member. She's like a professor. And so all of these elements kind of draw me into kind of her experience. I did not know much about this book, except that I knew it took place and she was kind of hiking or taking walks, which of course I love to do. It turns out that this book is basically about Catherine May getting diagnosed with autism, which I did not know that this is what this book was about. And it's about how she basically listens to this radio interview of this woman talking about autism and realizes that she thinks she has autism. And then what is her experience of kind of going through the process of coming to terms with that as she's also going on these lengthy walks in Cornwall. So it's kind of a both and. It's about kind of her journey doing these walks and hikes and also her journey of like coming to terms with this new identity that she's taking on. I thought this was really interesting and was so glad that I picked it up. Okay, next up I picked up Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, which is the second book in the Blood and Ash series by Jennifer Armentrout. Now, last month I read the first book in this series, totally picked it up as being influenced by people on social media who talked about this book and really enjoyed it. This is one that's kind of a vampire-based romance or romantasy, and I got completely sucked in. And so I picked up the second book. I have to say it took some willpower to not go straight to book 3 because these have kind of nice cliffhangers at the end. There's a lot of reveals about what's going on with the main character. Definitely spice between the two main characters, male main character and female main character. And I'm really excited to pick up the next book in this series. So definitely recommend it. I find them highly, highly entertaining. Okay, then also pretty much in succession, I read the 3 books in the To All the Boys I've Loved Before trilogy. So this starts with To All the Boys I've Loved Before, and then the second book is called P.S. I Still Love You, and then the third book is called Always and Forever, Laura Jean. And the basic premise of this book, or at least the first one, and then it kind of continues on from there, is that you have a girl in high school who, whenever she kind of ends a crush on a boy, she writes him a letter kind of telling him why she loved him and saying goodbye, kind of closing out in her own mind that relationship. And her sister ends up mailing out all of these letters because she gets upset with her. And all of these boys get these letters from Laura Jean kind of explaining that she was in love with them at one time. And this leads her to have a relationship with one of these boys. That shows up across multiple of these books. I found these books to be so fun. I listened to them all on audio, and I had them in hard copy as well, and basically just listened to them all back to back. Like, I really enjoyed the story. I know this has been made into an adaptation. I'll probably watch that as well. And this was just such a fun summer read, a really great way to close out the summer season. Okay, then I picked up another Alphabet Challenge book called Eloise and the Grump Next Door. This is one of the Oakley Island rom-coms by Emma St. Clair. And again, what I realized I had done is I had picked an Alphabet Challenge book that was a Kindle Unlimited, which means I do not own it. So I did end up reading this book, but I also replaced it with another e-letter book, which I will share about in just a moment. This book was super fun. It is about a woman who moves into a home that her grandmother owned. It's like a B&B, and her grandmother dies, leaves her this home, but she has to live in it and kind of renovate it in order to have the full inheritance from the grandmother. And there's a lawyer who lives next door, and he's the Grump next door, who was good friends with the grandmother and who's kind of helping her, you know, figure out what to do with this house. And of course they develop into a bit of a romance. The side characters in this book were great. I love the found family aspect. And there is a series with like the woman who lives in this house, her sister I think is in the next romance. Would totally pick it up, and looking forward to continuing with these characters. All right, I also picked up the next 3 books in the Scarpeta series by Patricia Cornwell. This is the series about a medical examiner who goes through multiple cases. And the first book that I read is called A Natural Exposure. I also picked up Point of Origin. And then the third book that I picked up is called Black Notice. What I would say is now that this is books 8 through 10 in the series, there's like 26 or 27 books. So I'm kind of picking up the pace here because I want to try to get through this year. And in this series of books, what you're seeing is a multi-book plot line about a serial killer. And what is kind of nice is you feel like, or at least I feel like, Patricia Cornwell is kind of settling into this series, and she's realizing she has some room to do these like multi-book arcs in terms of plot. So you have certain characters that are like getting killed off, you have other characters who are coming onto the scene, you have these criminals who are showing up across multiple books. And I feel like this is when the series is kind of starting to hit its stride a little bit. So I will be trying to pick up about 3 or 4 books in this series each month for the remainder of the year to just kind of keep working through this. But I really am continuing to enjoy it. I'm still at the point in the series where I have read these books before. And so I'm maybe like 2 books away from when I'm starting to get to the part that I have not read, and I don't know what the plots are. Okay, then I picked up another Alphabet Challenge book. It is called The Editor by Stephen Rowley. Stephen Rowley is known for a couple of books. I've read several of his things in the past. One of them is called The Guncle. This might be one of the more familiar ones that you've seen. And I would say that The Editor is one of his earlier works. I wanted to go back to it. It's basically about a man who has an editor in a publishing house, and she ends up being Jackie Kennedy. And I would say, I feel like this book, while well done, was not necessarily for me. Like I found it to be, if I'm honest, kind of boring. I listened to it on audio, and there was a lot in here about kind of this man and his relationship with his mother and his relationship with Jackie Kennedy, and like how he was kind of coming to terms with his childhood and various other things. If this sounds interesting to you, you should totally pick it up. I'm sure this is a book for some people, just not necessarily for me. Still glad I read it. Okay, then I picked up the 3rd book in the Cursebreaker series by Bridget Kemmerer. This is called A Vow So Bold and Deadly. And basically this is a trilogy that starts out with the first book is kind of a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and then it kind of branches off from there. And there's a kind of continued villain that shows up throughout all 3 of the books, and she especially makes she especially shows up in book 3, and there's kind of this what would I call it, like a boss fight. I mean, if you want to think about it that way, for like a video game, there's like a boss fight. But basically, like, I find these books to be very like contemporary fairy tale-esque, and I really enjoyed them. I really like Bridget Kemmerer's work. I would say that there's some of her other contemporary like YA fiction that is like my favorite of hers, but I feel like this is a very solid addition to her backlist. Okay, then I picked up a book called Winter in Paradise. It is the first book of 3 in the Paradise Trilogy by Ellen Hilderbrand. And this is a book that is basically about a woman who finds out that her husband is living a secret life, because in part of his secret life, he travels to kind of like a tropical location, and he dies while he's there. And she comes to realize that he had this like other life where he was living. And of course, this is like book 1. So there's a cliffhanger that happens at the end of book 1. I have not yet read books 2 and 3, but I have them out from the library. I am getting them on audio from my library, and I will definitely continue on with this series. I really like this. I also thought this was a really good summer read. I have not read a ton of Ellen Hildebrand's work, but I've heard so many good things about it, and she actually has a really broad backlist that I want to be picking up in the future. So would really recommend that one as well. Then I picked up the replacement alphabet challenge book that I replaced because Eloise and the Grump next door was Kindle Unlimited. So I picked up Elodie's Library of Second Chances by Rebecca Raisin. And this is a book that is very sweet. Any book about a library, I'm totally willing to pick up. Basically, this is the story of a woman who's kind of famous actually, and she wants to go and save this library that is kind of under threat of closing. And she doesn't want anybody to know who she is. And so she kind of like pretends to have another identity to come in and save this library. This is one of those books where the secondary characters are really wonderful. And one of the things that she does to save the library is she does that concept, and you may have heard of this, where you can check out a person and like hear the story of their life instead of checking out a book. And so that shows up in this as well, and just has some really like fun stories of these people that are from the community. So would highly recommend that one also. Another alphabet challenge book that I had is called The Escape Room by Megan Golden. I've read a couple others by Megan Golden in the past and enjoy them. This is just a straight up thriller. It is basically about people in a company who are caught in an elevator together, and it becomes an escape room. And of course, people are getting killed in this escape room, in this elevator, and you come to understand throughout the story why. This was a very fast read for me. I feel like it had that kind of thriller pacing, and would definitely recommend that one. Okay, then I had committed in the month of August, and actually really over the summer, to read the Stormlight Archive series. So I finished Oathbringer, which is the third book in the Stormlight Archive series. It's about 1,200 pages long. Dawnshard, which is a novella in this Stormlight Archive series that's in between books 3 and 4. And then Rhythm of War, which is the fourth book in the series, also about 1,200 pages. And it is the most recent book that has been published. I don't think the next book in this series is going to come out until like November of 24. So it has been, this is what we have right now in terms of the series. Brandon Sanderson, who's the author of this series, has said that there's gonna be like 10 books in this series. So I'm just trying to keep up with kind of what's going on. And what I would say is every book in this series, and you can guess this if they're all 1,200 pages, they just get more and more complicated in terms of like the plot, the characters. And the other thing that I would say is there are like massive swings in plot from like what's happening in book 1 to like what's happening in books 3 and 4 in terms of like what the characters represent, how they're being characterized, actions that they're taking. There's a lot going on. And what I think I'm gonna do actually, because I finished all of this up until now, I may go back and read some plot synopses that other people have written, just to be like clear that I know I hit all the main points of like what's going on. I also did this with the series by Robert Jordan, Wheel of Time, because there's just so much going on in these epic fantasy books that you can miss some things. So I definitely listen to these on audio, but I will say a 1,200 book on audio is like 60 hours long. I mean, they take forever to get through. I was really proud I was able to finish those this month. And I'm looking forward to the next book in the series when it shows up in November of 24. Okay, I also read The Inheritance Games. This is the first book in the Inheritance Games trilogy by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. And actually, maybe it's not a trilogy because I think there's a fourth book now. But I love this book. It's basically about this girl in high school who finds out that she's inheriting billions of dollars from this person that she does not know. And she doesn't know why she's inheriting this money. And he has these grandsons that thought they were going to inherit and then did not. And all of these other family members in the Hawthorne family that thought they were going to inherit and did not. And so she has to go live in this house with them. And then there's all these puzzles that she has to try to solve with these brothers to try to figure out why she got this money in the first place. It's really great. I'm super excited to move on to other books in this. I love the characterization. I love the side characters. I love the Hawthorne family. I think that the next books in this series are going to be really fun. Then I picked up another alphabet challenge book called The Eight, which is by Catherine Neville. This is actually in a series. I think there's a second book in the series. I think it could probably be read as a standalone, is my guess. the basic premise of this book, which is quite lengthy, I think it was like 600 to 700 pages long, is there is this group of nuns from the 1790s that are protecting a chess set that has kind of magical qualities. And then there is this woman who's like in finance from the 1970s, and she is getting sucked into this like chess set situation, I'll just call it. And there are a bunch of people who are still trying to get this chess set even, you know, like 200 years later. This is a book that I was so pleasantly surprised by. I mean, I was drawn in by the premise and the plot. I did not know what this was going to be. I don't think I've read anything else by this author. And I was so like caught up in this story, even though it was like super long, and like I'm not super interested in chess or nuns or, you know, finance. I mean, like none of these things are necessarily on the surface something that would draw me in. But I really, really enjoyed how the author kind of pulled all these things together and alternated the plot between these two timelines. So if you're like intrigued by that, I would definitely recommend it. I enjoyed it on audio as well. Okay, and then the last couple of books, or the last book that I read of the month is called Commencement. The subtitle is The Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education, and this is co-written by a few people, but the main author, I believe, is Kate Colbert. This is a book that is the kind of consolidation of over 100 interviews with college and university presidents about the future of higher education. And it's also long. This is like 500 pages long. Because this is a book that I consider to be a workbook, because I work in higher ed, I kind of read little bits and pieces of this over like my lunch hour at work. This was not something I read in my free time. I was kind of reading it during work hours. And it actually represents a lot of the kinds of things that I've been talking about with colleagues and other leaders at my institution. It covers things like workforce development, online education, the shifting business models of higher education, the shifting audiences, the demographic cliff, you know, all of these different things that we talk about in higher ed. And it covers it, I think, really both comprehensively and in a way that if you were just kind of like trying to understand current trends, you could just really kind of see the strands and how they all tie together. So that was one that I also really enjoyed and have actually already recommended it to a bunch of my colleagues. I bought a physical copy and like started passing it around at work because I think it's actually a really cool book. So those are the, I think, 29 books that I read in the month of August. And now I am ready to turn the page and pick up all kinds of new books in the month of September. So definitely leave your August reads down below in the comments below this video, and check out my upcoming September TBR video talking about all the books that I plan to read in the upcoming month. Thanks for watching and happy reading.